Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. We do have a special guest who I'll introduce to you later, but as usual, I will start with a bit of news. Quite a few news stories, actually, things I would like to give a mention to. I came across something on Twitter this week, a sort of a pro-life argument, the sort of my body, my choice sort of argument. Quite a nice way of responding to that, refuting that. It's saying so some people are claiming that their body has got 2 heads, 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 hearts, and 20 fingers, which that was quite a good line. I hadn't heard that one before. That's one up my sleeve now to use in debate or in other situations. That was a nice way of refuting the sort of it's all my body type of argument. But on Twitter this week, we ran a little poll as well. Because there have been scandal stories coming from the SNP at the usual rate, scandal stories coming from the Conservative Party at the usual rate. I say Conservative MPs been arrested on sort of sexual assault charges or something today. So I did a little Twitter poll of which is the most disreputable and scandal-ridden party. The SNP won, but in a close second came it's hard to decide between them. Then the Conservatives in last place. So basically the Conservatives came out better with a very unconvincing victory because a very large proportion of people said they really weren't sure which one to choose in that situation. Well, what else has been going on? I mean, I get the latest edition of Teaching Scotland from the General Teaching Council for Scotland. I mean, I look through it every time. I mean, you will virtually never, if not never, find anything about like how can we teach maths more effectively? How can we improve language skills? How can we make children better at spelling? The sort of things you might think would be in the Teaching Council for Scotland's magazine. Not a bit of it. It's all like therapeutic children's rights, political indoctrination. And the big thing they're going for in this issue is pupil-led curriculum design. Pupil-led curriculum design. Right. You got that idea? In other words, you say to the children, what would you like to be on the curriculum? Okay. As if they really have got much of an idea about what the different options are and what's going to be most useful or valuable to them. But inviting the children to design their own curriculum. I mean, it's really extreme progressive educational ideology in action. I mean, what should be happening is that the school, maybe even national guidelines, should say, right, these are the really important things you need to learn about in terms of core academic skills, vital knowledge, and about history and various character qualities. This is what you need to learn about. But instead, it's what would you like to learn about? But you can imagine what the children are going to say. The children will respond from their own very, very limited experience. And they'll tend to respond with the things the school's already taught them about. So a lot of the children would say, oh, we want to learn more about climate change and gender stereotyping. Because as far as they're aware, they're the 2 most important things you can learn about at school. So the children would probably say they want to do more of those things. But anyway, that's the latest trend in Scottish education. Pupil-led curriculum design. Can you believe it? Staying on the subject of education, you probably saw a story this week, a school in Glasgow, where the teachers are threatening strike action, not for more money, but because they're fed up of being assaulted and abused by the pupils. And violent attacks at the school have become fairly commonplace, and the teachers are just saying they've had enough. So they're considering refusing to go to work, which I think is perfectly reasonable. If there's a significant probability that you're going to be attacked while you're at school, then I think that's fair enough to refuse to go in. But all the discussion about it, you can imagine what it's like within the Scottish educational establishment. Everything comes back to money. What do we need here? We need more support staff, or we need clearer policies or whatever. It's heading towards, we need a specialist member of staff with every pupil who causes trouble. Then maybe we can get on with the lesson. But it's obviously unsustainable. What doesn't happen in all this discussion is people raise the issue and say, look, maybe our whole approach to discipline in schools is just wrong. So maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and relook at that. What I'm going to talk about to Daniel later on is relevant to this as well. But as you know, in Scottish schools, the philosophy is punishment is bad, unnecessary, counterproductive, harmful to young people. Instead, you just need to talk things through. I keep saying to educationists, how's it going? And the teachers are just getting more and more concerned by terrible behavior in schools. But it doesn't matter how bad it gets. It doesn't matter how many horror stories hit the newspapers. The answer is always the same. We need to go further in the same direction and just have even more little counseling sessions with the children who've just smashed up the classroom, punched the teacher or whatever, and that will make it all okay. Well, obviously that's not working out too well. Now, my talk at the conference, the Scottish Family Party, not conference, rally, sorry, a week ago on Saturday, that will be on YouTube very soon. One of the things I mentioned in it was that my video, the video of me speaking in Glasgow at this was sex education, sex survey protest, that video got posted on the website of a sort of relatively well-known public figure. And that public figure was David Icke. If you don't know who David Icke is, he used to be a sports commentator, but he's subsequently gone off the deep end into every wild and wacky conspiracy theory and bizarre spiritual mumbo jumbo. You can imagine, I think he thinks he's the son of God, thinks the world's run by lizard people or whatever. But anyway, he's seen fit to put the video of me speaking in Glasgow on his website. Now, on the one hand, obviously, the more people hear about the issues I was raising, the better. On the other hand, if people think that we're somewhere in some way aligned with characters like David Icke, then that's a bit of a problem. But obviously, we're not. I think most of his views are, say, completely sort of off the wall. And I mean, if he were to endorse the family party, that would probably be more of an embarrassment than a blessing. Anyway, the reason I'm saying that is, as if that wasn't bad enough, we've now had a mention from someone else, another internet character that some of you might be familiar with. And that is a gentleman in America by the name of Alex Jones, who apparently gave the Scottish Family Party a positive mention. I don't know what he talked about, but he gave us a mention in any case. Now, Alex Jones is a very sort of loud, brash, again, wild conspiracy theory maniac in America. I'll basically say, I'm sure there might be a little bit of truth in some of what he says, but basically really extreme. I mean, I think he's met his downfall, actually. I think he's been sued and bankrupted as we speak. I don't know the details, but I think that's happening. Remember the Sandy Hook school massacre in America? Some gunman went in, a lot of children were killed. And he, in response, said he thought the whole thing was a fake. And so it would have things like pictures of the family photographs where they'd say, this is the child who was killed. And he'd be saying, that was photoshopped. So the family is understandably distraught and utterly furious. So I think there've been a few court cases against him that they're just repeatedly winning. So I think he's going to be bankrupted. Anyway, so that's Alex Jones as well, has seen fit to endorse the Scottish Family Party. It's just a shame more sort of mainstream communicators don't publicize what we're doing as well, because what we're doing is completely unrelated to crazy conspiracy theorists. It has no relationship with them at all. That is a completely different world. But somehow or other, they seem to connect. I think part of it might be that some conspiracy theorists have the idea that, everything's run by a cabal of pedophiles alongside the Satanists and the Jews and all the other regulars. So that's what they believe. So if we're producing material saying, concern about the sexualization of children, then they'll tend to latch onto things and say, that's a bit of evidence, a bit of fuel for the conspiracy fire that everything's run by pedophiles. So maybe that's what's happening there. But in any case, I found it quite amusing to have featured with David Icke and Alex Jones within a week, it seems. Right, now I don't seem to be getting any comments through here, and there seems to be something a little curious about the live stream. So I think maybe it's not working on Facebook. If anyone on any of the channel, Facebook or YouTube, if you could comment, let me just see if it's working, because no comments are coming up for me at the moment, which seems a bit strange. Right, carrying on. The issue of the coronavirus vaccines and abortion comes up from time to time with people. I did debate this with someone. All right, the comments are working. Okay, just no one's had much to say tonight. No, keep the comments coming in. It comes up from time to time. I did debate this with someone a few months ago, but the sound didn't work. So it couldn't be published. But I'll just outline our position again. Our comments coming in. Right. Nice to see everyone. Right. So the position with the coronavirus vaccine. Some of the vaccines are produced using a cell line. So a cell line is a sort of group of cells can be made to reproduce themselves. And you can then take this reproducing set of cells, you can then split it, then you've got two reproducing sets of cells, and you can keep them reproducing for decades and decades and decades. And that's what's done. So in some research laboratories and manufacturing as well, they keep these cell lines going for, say, for decades, and they use them. One of the things they use them for is to produce vaccines, to manufacture vaccines, not to test them, to manufacture them. These cell lines, just to emphasize, it's not like a living thing. It's just pretty trivial, basic cells reproducing themselves. So it's not alive in any way. And so as far as I'm concerned, that's entirely uncontroversial. The controversy comes in some people's minds that it's not certain, it's thought that one of the cell lines used to produce one of the coronavirus vaccines came from an aborted fetus. Now, the man who actually did that originally, he says he's not actually sure where it came from. It was provided for him within a hospital. He wasn't actually sure of the source, but it seems likely that it came from an aborted fetus. So some pro-life campaigners are saying, therefore, that vaccine is tainted by abortion, and anyone who's pro-life shouldn't take that vaccine. It should be against your conscience. So as I looked into that and thought about it, I decided, a personal view, it's not family party policy, my personal view was I didn't think there was a moral concern there, because the abortion was not carried out for the purpose of providing these cells. The abortion had already happened, and so the medical researchers in the hospital, they needed some cells from a fetus, basically. Now, if they'd been pro-life, they could have said, okay, let's wait for a miscarriage. And they might have had to say, wait for a couple of weeks to get a miscarriage in order to get the same sort of cells. But they just thought, the easy way is to take them from an aborted fetus. Okay, so the abortion was not necessary to the process. It just happened to be where they probably took the original cells from to start the cell line. Now, I won't go into it in any more detail, but to my mind, that connection does not taint the vaccines with abortion, because the abortion was not a part in that process. It was an incidental part, an unnecessary part of it. So to my mind, there's no link. Now, people who think that there is a link, therefore the vaccines are tainted, sort of morally tainted, I would respect that view. I think it's, we thought it through seriously. So to my mind, I didn't come to that same conclusion. And the family party, we don't have a policy, but I do think the line that you can't really be pro-life if you're going to accept the vaccines, I think that's pushing it too far. Well, let's see. All right, a couple of things to go, then we'll move to our special guest. I came across an article in the Courier newspaper. Is it called the Dundee Courier? I used to think it was called the Dundee Courier, but it covers a bigger area than that. It's actually quite a major newspaper. I think it's got a much bigger circulation than the Scotsman, for example. Anyway, the Courier did an article about what will your children be taught in sex education. Now, where did this article come from? I would imagine it came from the government or Education Scotland or rshp.scot, the sex education resource producers. Basically, I think it was a press release from one of those sources, and they just published it in the newspaper. And I read through it. Totally misleading. You would read through it and think, that all sounds perfectly reasonable. It's always the way. When they describe what's in sex education, it always sounds very bland and vague and positive and uncontroversial. It's when you look at what they actually mean by that there's a problem there. So the Courier sort of did their job for them in passing on what I would say was deliberately deceptive, deliberately inadequate, deliberately incomplete information to the public. But that's what we're up against. We try and show the truth, and then the government, etc., they try and obscure it by just presenting sort of vague platitudes, benign descriptions of it that are often completely unrelated or completely unrepresentative of the actual content of it. But it just shows the government, etc., they're feeling the need to be trying to counter the criticism that has come from basically originally the Scottish Family Party. It's spread a little bit beyond that, but that's basically where it's come from. Right, that's my things dealt with. So it's time for our special guest. Now, sometimes the way we get special guests onto the live stream is someone will comment on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. Normally YouTube, I don't tend to look at the comments in there. Sometimes on YouTube, someone will put something, and I don't really want to get into a big debate in the comments thread on YouTube. I haven't really got time for that. So I sometimes just say to someone, would you like to come onto the live stream to discuss it? And very occasionally someone says yes. Even more occasionally, they do actually turn up to do it. Quite a few people say they'll do it, but then they get cold feet at the last minute. So this evening's guest came through that source, but I realized after then it is actually someone I have encountered before. So let's welcome Daniel. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, Richard.
Right, just there. Daniel is a member of the Scottish Libertarian Party. He's been a candidate for them. And we were actually in a hustings together last year. But I didn't realize that when that was all set up. Actually, there's one more thing. We can talk about this together, actually. There's one more thing I forgot to mention in my introduction. Say, Daniel's been a candidate for the Libertarians. Where were you the candidate, Daniel?
In Midlothian South.
Midlothian, right, okay. We thought we could just talk about the results and how we did. The thing I was going to mention was that I've been having a look at our second, third, and fourth preference votes, which we didn't do initially sort of the first day, because it takes a bit longer to do that. And the story is this. When our first preference was said, it was 1.3, which is double from last year where we were 0.6, roughly. First and second preference, overall in all of our 84 wards, we got 3.3%. First, second, or third choice, in total, 6.5%. Which I was quite encouraged by, because first, second, or third, that's definitely a positive endorsement. That's people saying, we like your party. We might not like it quite as much as other, or for tactical reasons, we're going to vote for another. Yeah, depends. But that's 6.5%, definitely showing a positive opinion of the family party. And to get MSPs, 5 or 6% is the minimum. If you include fourth preference choices, we were up to about 9%. 2 years ago, only 9% of people had heard of the family party. And now 9% are voting for us in a sort of reasonably positive position. And the other thing I would say with that's 9% of the population in our 84 wards were willing to vote for us with pro-life on the ballot paper. So that's quite encouraging, isn't it? 9% of people happy to vote for a party, to express support for it, with pro-life there by the name. So that's encouraging. So tell us about the Libertarian results. Did you take any positives from them, or?
Well, I can speak about my own results if you like. In the first place, I was a little disappointed because the last time, 5 years ago, that I ran in a council election, I got 99 votes.
Right.
So I thought, right, I really want to do better this time. I want to get 100 votes. And I only got 58.
But was the family party candidate in your ward?
No, there wasn't.
Right. Was there another small party candidate?
Yeah, and actually I did better than the Alba candidate, yeah.
Right. Okay. What was the picture overall for the Libertarians? Was the percentage up overall?
Well, actually, I don't actually know that. It's a little embarrassing. I probably should know that, but I don't. I think overall it was a little embarrassing, or disappointing, I should say. But just before the election, unfortunately, we had some internal conflict in the party. Couldn't really have come at a worse time.
I was aware of that. Some leadership challenger who I saw on Twitter seemed to be trying to stir up trouble. In any case, let's put it that way. So.
Well, I'd rather not say anything because I'm kind of caught in the middle, and I'd rather not be involved in the drama.
Well, the only thing I can say, because it's in the public domain, I saw it on Twitter. One person's been kicked out of the Scottish Libertarian Party, and it's also, I think, 99 that the last time that would have been quite promising, I think, but gone down a bit last time. So we were very pleased overall. We've roughly, whichever way you look at it, we tried various comparisons, but we think our vote share roughly doubled. There's lots of ifs and buts, but we think overall, yeah, we doubled. The bold statistics show that we doubled on sort of the main two measures that we're very happy about. Let's just Alejandro, in the absence of an SFP candidate in my ward, voted for the Libertarian Party. Right, Alejandro, next time you be the candidate for the Scottish Family Party. Okay. It's interesting that the Scottish Libertarian Party, we've had a few people on the live stream. I know a few people in it. There are certainly some pretty major differences between us, but there's a bit of overlap as well. We find some points of agreement. The other thing with the Scottish Libertarians is they're normally up for a debate, which why we've ended up with a few people on here, whereas the other parties debate it like they avoid it like the plague. They avoid it like coronavirus. But right, Daniel. So, I mean, the topic that you commented on YouTube. Do you want to tell us about that? What were you thinking there?
Well, do you want me to talk about what the original video was about, or what?
Yes, can do. Yeah. Yep.
Well, I think the video was about the fact that, according to latest research, nursery appears to be bad for children's development, and it's better to be at home with parents for children. And I commented something like, paraphrasing, there's also lots of studies that have been done on smacking, which shows that smacking is very harmful for children, and yet the Family Party does not oppose smacking. And I was going to say violence against children there, but I didn't want to, well, violence against children sounds a lot stronger than smacking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're saying, is that your sole reason you're against smacking? Just that you think that there's evidence that shows that it's harmful?
Well,
no,
that is just the icing on the cake.
Okay,
the main
what's
reason,
the cake then?
Well, hitting a child is a violation of the non-aggression principle.
Okay, could you state that principle?
It's wrong to initiate force against another person.
Right, you don't really believe that, do you? Because there are lots of situations when you think it is justified to use force against another person, don't you?
Such as?
The police?
Well, I said initiate force.
Yeah, the police need to initiate force quite regularly, don't they?
In what circumstances?
If someone's behaving in a dangerous or threatening manner and the police need to restrain them and remove them, then force is necessary?
In that case, the perpetrator is the one who is initiating, not the police.
Okay. What's your definition of aggression then? So you're not just talking physical aggression.
Well, I don't understand. I mean, it means that you don't hit people, you don't steal things from people.
Well, stealing's, I wouldn't say stealing's normally under the definition of aggression, is it? I'm just trying to understand this non-aggression principle. I'm still not quite with it, because I mean the police can use force if, say, a drug dealer or something is resisting arrest. He's basically trying to run away from the police. Then the police can use force to restrain him and arrest him, can't they? Does that contradict this non-aggression principle?
Well, selling drugs is not a violation of non-aggression principle. So I would say that you shouldn't be arrested for doing something like that.
Okay, let's say someone's driving at 150 miles an hour and the police follow them, and then the man runs away from his car. Can the police chase him and grab him and arrest him? Use force?
Well, it's a difficult situation. I mean, in a free society, if it was a private road, there would be a speed limit imposed by the owner of the road. And if a person breaks the speed limit, then they're breaking the rules. And that means that just like if someone comes into your house and does something that you don't want to do, like, let's just say that you have a rule, which is if someone comes into your house, they have to take their shoes off. If they refuse to do that, you can tell them to leave. And if they don't, then you can either call the police or you can escort them to the door.
Well, let's just stay with the police. I mean, do you believe that the police can arrest people who are not willing to be arrested? So the police can grab people, put handcuffs on them, put them in the back of the van and take them to a police station. Should the police be able to do that?
Well, I would say it depends what the person has done.
Well, yeah, they're suspected of a crime, a serious
Yeah.
crime.
Well, it's a difficult situation, based on what evidence I would have to say.
Right.
What do you
Okay, I
think?
mean, I'm just trying to pin down this non-aggression principle that you've quoted. I'm still very unclear what it involves, because your definition of aggression seems to be extremely flexible. So I'm not sure I'm understanding the principle. I mean, can you give other illustrations? So are you a pacifist?
No, because if someone initiates force against me, I would be perfectly justified in using self-defense.
And that applies to nations as well.
Well, there's no such thing as a nation. A nation only exists in people's heads. They're only human beings.
There's no such thing as a nation.
No, not really.
Okay, what entities are currently fighting in the Ukraine? Because to my mind, that's a war between the Ukraine and Russia. But if the nations don't exist, who is fighting there?
Well, people are
Who or what?
fighting. What? What was that?
So people are fighting. Just
Well, yeah.
individuals. Just individuals.
Yes.
So there are no larger entities at play. It's just something that's arisen with individuals. Surely that's not a credible interpretation of events, is it?
Well, what do you think?
Well, I think nations are real. They're sort of administrative, whatever constructs, however you want to structures, however you want to call it, that are controlled from the top to some degree, and that's resulted in the war in Ukraine because the leadership of the nation of Russia has decided to deploy its military forces to invade the Ukraine. And Ukraine, another nation, again led from the top, has decided to defend itself militarily against them. I mean, to my mind, that's so blindingly obvious that I can't see that any other interpretation of that has got any credibility at all, has it? I mean, nations don't exist.
Well, okay, we've gotten very abstract very quickly, but yeah. Ukraine used to be a part of Russia, and now they're separate countries.
It used to be a part of what? Part of what? Part of Russia. What's
Ukraine,
Russia?
Ukraine used to be a part of Russia, didn't it?
Yeah, but what's Russia?
Well, Russia is an area of land with people living in it. And, we think of it as a country, but, if you look at the Earth from space, you can see that Russia doesn't exist other than in our head and on maps.
That's just a bizarre. Russia doesn't exist apart from in your head. So all of the machinery of government that exists in the Russian Federation, well, I say exists. You think it doesn't exist. It only exists in our heads. And because you can't see it from space, it doesn't really exist.
You can't see the borders from space.
I'm not sure about the argument that because you can't see something from space, it doesn't exist. Well, you can't see, the law of Scotland from space. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You can't see the boundary of the city of Edinburgh from space. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Well, again, Edinburgh only exists in maps and in our imagination. I mean, the land exists, the people exist, the castle exists, but, the city Edinburgh is just a concept.
Okay, does the Scottish Libertarian Party exist?
Well, only as a concept.
Only as a concept. Right. So you're a member of a party that doesn't really exist.
Well, okay, think about it this way. Does a forest exist?
Yes.
What is a forest?
A collection of trees in a locality.
Well, okay, so if you only have one tree, is that a forest?
No.
If you have two trees, is that a forest?
No.
Well, okay, so how many trees do you have to have before you have a forest?
That's not clearly defined. There isn't a strict definition of a forest, but we know what a forest is. With lots of things, when you try to define them, you can't define the border of the concept accurately, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean the concept is meaningless. I'm just trying to get to the heart of the non-aggression principle. I mean, to be honest, I don't understand it, and the more we've talked about it, the less it seemed to make sense to me, to be honest. So the non-aggression principle, it seems like your definition of aggression is so vague and flexible that it doesn't seem to be a very valuable principle. I mean, apart from the evidence that you're going to cite in a minute, are there any other reasons that you're against smacking children?
Well, no, those are the two main ones, the principle and the consequences.
Okay. Right, how about the consequences then? What effect does smacking children have on them? What does the evidence report?
Well, okay, let me just refer to my notes that I've got here. Most of the statistics are from the US and the UK. So 90% of families hit toddlers 3 times a week. 1 in 4 hit their children before the age of 6 months, which is obviously too young for the child to be able to understand the concept of cause and effect. 85% of parents would rather use an alternative to smacking if they knew of one that worked. Smacking leads to antisocial behavior, increased aggression, spousal abuse, and child abuse in adulthood. Smacking is also linked with alcohol and drug addiction, anxiety, and depression. Smacking lowers IQ in a dose-dependent way, which means that the more you smack a child, the more you're going to lower their IQ. Smacking is also linked with PTSD symptoms, promiscuity, sadomasochism, cheating, lying, bullying, fighting, delinquency, crime, and unemployment. And one more thing is that I haven't defined what smacking is yet, which is important. So when I say smacking, I don't mean just doing that. Smacking means that you strike a child, usually somewhere other than in the face, although some children do get smacked in the face. You strike a child with the intention of causing sufficient pain in order to make the child correct their behavior.
Okay, right. Lots of things to respond to there. Let's start with alternatives. Which alternatives would you recommend?
Well, first of all, I'm not a parenting expert. I am a window cleaner. So please don't take anything that I'm saying at face value. Anyone who wants to can just do a quick Google search for any of this stuff, and the information will be right there. Having said that, alternatives. Well, let's see. It depends how old the child is. If the child is too young to understand, then, well, I tend to think that they can get away with anything. What do you think?
I was asking for alternatives. Right. What you said about young children not being able to understand. I mean, obviously, with very young children, that might be the case. But I think very young children, I wouldn't put an age on it. I don't know, one or younger than one. I mean, they do understand full well what no means. They know there's some things they're supposed to do. There's some things they're not supposed to do. And they also, you see the very young children, you'll see them do something that they know is wrong and then look at the adult to see what the response is going to be. So I would imagine smacking of children too young to understand it. I think that's a very, very rare thing, I would imagine. And if that's the case, that's not an argument against smacking in general. It's only an argument against smacking children who are too young to understand. But I think children understand pretty young. So I'd say that's not an argument against smacking in general. So I think that one is crossed off the list as far as I'm concerned. In terms of all these terrible consequences, in terms of psychological problems, domestic abuse, I mean, goodness knows what society used to be like back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, when children, I mean, virtually every child would be smacked routinely. I mean, look at the rates of mental health problems and all the problems that were around in those days of young people. He said sarcastically, because these things were incredibly low level. The more we've gone in the current direction in terms of child rearing, then the more unhappy, troubled, and troublesome young people have become. So when researchers try and do their little experiment, they tend to get the result that, to be honest, fits with their opinions. When you look at the grand experiment, which is not an experiment, it's reality. If you look at the changes that have happened over a number of decades, societies that have moved away from disciplining children, and not just in terms of smacking, just in general, the trend has been away from adult and parental authority. The children have become more and more unhappy and troubled as that process is carried on. So we could say it's what are you going to believe? You're going to believe like decades of reality, or you're going to believe a few little studies produced in sociology departments, which are renowned for their extreme, if not total, philosophical, political bias.
Well, okay, so I think, as far as I understand it, it's true that behavior and mental health in children has been declining. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that that's because they aren't being hit enough. I think that that's because parents are getting divorced too frequently. Children are being put into nursery far too young. Schools are terrible. It isn't because they just need to be hit more.
That's a very crude misrepresentation of what I'm saying. I mean, in general, I think so discipline for children has deteriorated. It's pretty gone out of fashion. A lot of parents, the same as a lot of teachers and a lot of so-called experts, they believe that doing anything to children that makes them unhappy damages them, causes like irreparable harm. So your mission as a parent or a teacher or any other adult is to just keep children happy all the time. And if you can keep them happy all the time, then they'll just turn out to be lovely, fine, upstanding citizens. But I just think that's not the way it is. I think children in particular, it's the same with adults, but children in particular, sometimes they need to learn the hard way. Boys in particular, and punishment is an important part of them, of their training and their learning to become, their moral development, if you want to put it like that. And I think throughout world history and all over the world, in virtually every society that's ever existed, apart from a tiny few of the most progressive countries currently, it's been normal for parents to smack their children when they're naughty.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And until fairly recently in history, you could have said exactly the same thing about slavery.
Slavery, though, you can see the results of it and the fundamental moral principle. But I mean, does anyone claim that slavery didn't do anyone any harm, or there's been a deterioration in any way as a result of doing away with slavery?
Well,
I think that's
not anymore. But at the time during slavery, people who, anti-abolitionists, people that owned slaves, they would make arguments like, well, we cannot release these slaves. They don't even know how to read.
Okay, yeah. So what you're saying is it may be that every society through human history, apart from a sort of handful of hyper-progressive countries in the current age, maybe all those are wrong. Maybe the hyper-progressive countries are right. Okay, I will concede that. I know the fact that it's been like the vast majority over the entire human history in every culture. Maybe they've all been wrong, and maybe I say the modern experts have got it right. I will concede that point. It is a possibility. But I would return then to the evidence of where this path is leading us. Just going back to the research. I mean, you quoted all sorts of research outcomes. I'll just go through some of the problems with the research. Some of the problems. One is what they call lumping, and that research generally doesn't distinguish between really, beating, what we would class as abusive, and what most people would regard as a smack, okay, which are very different things. But a lot of this research is based on self-report by parents. So if you say to parents, did you tick the box, did you smack your children, or did you severely beat them? Obviously, no one's going to say they severely beat them. So what tends to happen is the abusive parents get lumped in with the perfectly reasonable smacking parents, and that skews the results. Another thing with this, if you think about, say, a child who behaves badly, are they more likely to be smacked? Yes. Are they likely to be smacked more? Yes. Are they likely to be a troublesome character in later life? Well, probably yes. So what you're doing, you're looking at the correlation between a problem and its response. It's a bit like saying, if you look at this research for, let's say, hay fever pills, okay? I've never taken a hay fever pill in my life, and I've never had hay fever. But there's lots of other people who've taken quite a few hay fever pills, and they get hay fever. So it looks like the way to avoid hay fever is to not take any pills. You see what I'm saying? So if you've got a really naughty boy, then they're more likely to get smacked. But the fact that that's a really naughty boy means that they're also more likely to have difficulties in the future, whether they're smacked or not. So that sort of confounds the research in a way that's often not accounted for. I think genetics, generally in social science, genetics is ignored as well. Because if you've got some very placid parents, they're going to tend to have very placid offspring, which is, even if it's nothing to do with their parenting style at all, it's just genetic. Whereas parents who are not so, like that, different than that, then maybe they'd be more likely to smack the kids, and also the kids are more likely to have a different sort of character. So genetics needs taken into account. The other thing which I said earlier on, which I think is absolutely key, is the whole world of sociology is so politicized and extreme in its bias that I really have to take what they say with a pinch of salt. But also there are studies as well that have shown benefits for, well, I wouldn't say, correlation doesn't imply causation, but have shown the children who were smacked when they were younger actually have better outcomes for various things in later life as well. So there is evidence that points the other way. So the evidence overall, I would say, I don't find convincing.
Okay, well, you said an awful lot there, and I don't know if I should respond to anything or if we should move on.
Okay, well, let's go back to the principle then, that it's wrong to smack. I mean, as alternatives to smacking, what other things would you consider? What are reasonable forms of punishment for children?
Well, rather than punishments, I like, and this is just me personally, I prefer to think of it in terms of consequences because there's a big difference.
Okay, well, what's the difference?
Well, if my wife does something that upsets me, there are consequences, but I don't punish her, obviously. And usually the consequence is that I just don't want to speak to her for a while, and if I'm very unhappy with her, maybe I'll sit in a different room or even leave the house, go for a walk, and then at a later point, sit down and talk it through with her, try to figure out what happened, how we can prevent it from happening in the future. And
that's interesting. So it seems what I often find with people who are against smacking children, when you talk to them, eventually you realize they're actually against the very concept of punishment at all. Is that your position? Are you against the very concept of punishment in every context? Like in the criminal justice system?
No.
So you think criminals deserve punishment?
Well, it depends what you mean by a criminal. In our society, a person who sells drugs is a criminal.
Right. That's just avoiding the basic straightforward question. But you agree that criminals should be punished. Like someone who drives their car too fast gets a fine. Someone who murders someone gets sent to prison.
Someone who murders another person should be punished, yes.
Right. Why should they be punished, in your view?
Well, because murder is a violation of the non-aggression principle.
It's a lot more than that, isn't it?
What else is it? What more?
Well, it's depriving someone of their life, isn't it? It's killing it. It's taking human life. Yes. Yeah, okay. So you believe that wrongdoing deserves punishment. Does that apply to children as well?
Well, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yes, definitely. Yeah, it applies to everyone. Everyone who's morally responsible. And that includes children. So I think children particularly need punishment at times because they're going through the phase of moral development where they're forming their moral view, they're forming their character, they're getting into the habits. And I think it's really important at those stages that they're pointed in the right direction, that they develop good habits and good attitudes. They're willing to accept proper authority and they're willing to keep their behavior within appropriate boundaries. So I think it's very important at that stage. It's important for those practical reasons, but it's also important just as a matter of justice as well.
I understand. Yeah, and do you punish your wife?
No, because that's not a relationship in which I'm in a position to mete out punishment. But there are some relationships where it is appropriate. So, for example, a teacher and pupil, or the criminal justice system, or basically the government and citizens, or parents and children. There are some examples of where issuing a punishment and the other person submitting to it is just an expression of proper authority.
Okay, and how do you decide? Is it just your opinion or are there any principles behind it?
How do I decide of those relationships?
Yes.
I think that's a good question. With the state, I believe that's a very fundamental principle. If you imagine that principle didn't apply, then I mean the alternative is anarchism, isn't it? If you're going to have no law enforcement, no criminal justice system, then that's anarchism. So I think it's part of our social contract, if you like. That's something that people need the government to do. But in terms of the other relationships, yeah, go
on. I am an anarchist, and as far as I understand it, that isn't what anarchy means. Anarchism doesn't mean no rules, it means no rulers.
Right, okay, yeah. If we stick on to our subject there, we're talking about the state having the power to punish citizens. Basically, in other words, having a criminal justice system, which I think is necessary. And you agree with me. You think that's necessary, don't you?
Well, no, I'm probably the wrong person to ask that, because I don't think that we should have a state. I think that we should have a free society.
Right. Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, that's just a really extreme and tenable. We'll leave that alone. We'll leave that alone.
Not an argument.
So when it comes to, I would say that maybe everyone needs to be in a position where everyone in society, yeah, for a society to function properly, people need to be responsible and accountable and held to a set of rules, which is the law. So you need a criminal justice system. Now, children, we don't want children to be interacting with the state in terms of the criminal justice system. We don't want to be phoning the police when they do something wrong. We don't want them to go to court and go to prison. So that role is sort of delegated to parents, and parents deal with it on a much more informal scale, much more informal, fluid. I mean, the range of punishments is much more restricted, and that's the best way. So the parents' role is to prepare children for adult life, part of which is to live within a land with a criminal justice system. The other thing is be able to treat people properly, maintain relationships, etc. So that's the parents' role. I mean, do you disagree with that? I mean, you're asking me to justify it. I'm not sure I can say much more than I have, but do you disagree with me with that?
Well, I think I do, and I'll tell you why. You said that children should not interact with the state or law enforcement.
Ideally, no. It's parents' role to be like the mini criminal justice system for their own children. Yeah.
Okay, but in extreme circumstances, like, when back in the 90s, when James Bulger was murdered by John Vendables and the other one, Robert Thompson, who were just 10-year-old kids,
yeah, the state should get involved there. But in every school, every day, there would be dozens of incidents that if they happen between adults, they'll be classed as crimes. Also within families as well, there are a lot of things that go on, which if they were between adults, would be classed as crimes, like, brother thumps brother. But if you go up to someone and thump them in the streets, then you get arrested and go before the court. If 5-year-old thumps his 7-year-old brother, then the parents deal with it, with a view to preparing those children so that when they enter adulthood, they can function within the criminal justice system. Criminal justice system function within relationships, function in society.
Well,
but it's the parents' role to do that.
Let me see if I understand. A 5-year-old hits his 7-year-old brother.
Mm-hmm.
You think that a good way to deal with that is to hit the 7-year-old?
Right. We're moving back to a different topic. I was just establishing the point that the parents have responsibility to basically sort of implement a mini criminal justice system, a moral training camp, if you like, within the family. You wouldn't use those terms, but that's what it effectively is. It's the parents' role to discipline the children and help in their moral development, like that. Now, the point you're making now is that if someone's hit someone, surely it doesn't make sense for you to smack them, because that's doing the same thing. But that argument doesn't really hold
You're
up.
hitting a child while saying,
yeah,
"Don't
I know.
hit."
Yeah, I get your point. But let's imagine that an adult, kidnapped another adult and like shut them in a room for whatever length of time, didn't let them out. Okay. And then that person was prosecuted and they were sent to prison. So in other words, because they locked someone up, they were locked up. Now you could say, how can that make sense? How can you teach someone that locking people up is wrong by locking them up? But I think most people would say, well, actually, it's perfectly reasonable for the state to lock someone up in punishment because what they did was wrong, but what the state is doing is right. And that's the case here as well. I think the relationship with parents and the children is different than the relationship between children and other children, which applies to every other aspect of discipline as well. Like the 7-year-old is not in a position to impose any sort of punishment on the 5-year-old because that's not the relationship. But the parents are in a different relationship to the children, so the parents do have the right to impose punishments on them. The children have not got the right to impose on the parents or to impose on each other. And I think that's a really natural, intuitive understanding that all parents have and all children have as well.
All right. And, well, again, is that just your opinion or are you saying that that's a fact?
It'd be quite difficult to describe something like that as a fact. We're into the realm of values rather than the facts there. But I think it is the natural intuition of parents and children around the world. But basically, when kids are smacked, I don't think kids think to themselves, well, if you smack me, I should be able to smack you. And they can't understand why not. That's not the way it works. I think children know, maybe it has to be instilled in them, I don't know, but I think they know that is not right, that they haven't got the right to treat their parents like that. Or maybe part of the function of parents is to make it clear to the children that they haven't got the right to do that, that the relationship is different. The parents are authority figures in a way.
Well, let me just tell you about something from my own experience with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that if I do something to my daughter, eventually she starts doing it to me. So when she was younger, I would hold her and I would pat her on the back for long periods of time. And then eventually she started patting me on the back. I would feed her by placing food in her mouth. And then eventually she started putting food in my mouth. So kids, I mean, and look, this is just my experience, but yeah, kids know instinctively that if you do something to me, that means that I can do it to you.
No, they don't. I think they understand very well. There's lots of things that children see adults doing that they know they're not supposed to do themselves. Like with young children, they see adults using sharp knives. They see them driving cars. They see them using dangerous tools. They see them doing all sorts of things. So it's quite normal for adults to do things that they know that they're saying the children are not to emulate that. That's not something for children to do. So I just don't accept that argument that children are incapable of making a distinction. They assume that anything an adult does is something that they can do. I just don't think children think like that.
Well, okay, so let me refine what I said. Children have a very good instinct for knowing when their parents are being a hypocrite. Like if a parent smokes and then says to their child, don't smoke, the child knows you're just a hypocrite. Or if the parent swears, uses bad language, and says to the child, don't swear, the child knows you're just a hypocrite.
Now, that's partly true. If we take the smoking illustration, if someone says, look, I'm addicted to cigarettes, I wish I wasn't, but I am, it'd be really good if you didn't make the same mistake as me, so I urge you not to smoke. And that's a perfectly reasonable line. Okay, the message might be undermined by the fact that the person smokes, but I think the message can still be valid with that.
Well, okay. And what about swearing?
Swearing again, it obviously would undermine someone's message. But if they did say this is something, I wish you didn't do or regret doing or whatever. But the point with smacking is, as I say, it's within a unique relationship. It's within a parent-child relationship. Parents and children don't see themselves as equals. Increasingly, the pressure is the parents and children and adults and children should be equals. That's equals. That's what children's rights are all about. But I think that's wrong. I think that the proper relationship between adults and children, parents and children, is one of authority. I think children say they naturally realize that, and they accept perfectly well there are things that adults can do and children cannot do, or there's things that can happen in one relationship but can't happen in another. Again, if you go back to that, if you go back to the days when smacking was very common, I mean, it still is. I mean, there's no smacking ban in England. Let's remember. Was there some massive violence against parents in those days, or is there violence against parents and teachers now? There's more violence against parents and teachers now than there was in previous decades. And so I'm not saying it's this simple, but the rough picture is that as decades have gone, as children are disciplined less severely, including less smacking, then violence among young children and violence from children to parents has increased. So I'm not saying that's a really simple relationship, but that is the big picture.
Well, so you think, well, okay, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you think the best thing to do is to be more violent with children?
And the violence is not the right word to use. Violence is intended to harm someone. Okay, inflicting pain
is intended to harm someone.
No, it's not intended to harm them. It's for their benefit. It's intended to punish, and it's instructional, and it's justice. It's helping them to learn to behave well, and to learn that when you don't behave well, like you said, there's consequences, and you shouldn't get away with it. I think that's a really deep intuition we have. If someone does something wrong, they shouldn't get away with it. And smacking is one of the ways of making sure the child doesn't feel that they've got away with something done wrong. I'm not saying it's the only way. I mean, if some parents decide that's not what they want to do, then okay, fair enough. But in terms of the government outlawing smacking, I think that's definitely a step too far. The time has rolled on very quickly, and let's just have a look here. Smacking is short, sharp chastisement. That's right. I mean, I think that's one of the things with smacking is it is so quick, whereas other things, I don't know, they tend to take longer, and the longer they take, the less likely they are to be fully implemented as well. Children need boundaries. I worked in a nursery. They banned the word naughty. Oh dear, that's unbelievable, isn't it? I'm not sure I'd heard that one. No, maybe I had actually. Yeah, saying you can't call the children naughty because it's judgmental or something. I mean, it's absolute madness. Right, but time has flown on, so we would better leave it there. And we do have a special guest next week. I can't quite remember who it is at the moment. So I will hopefully see you next week. Daniel, thanks very much for coming on and sharing your thoughts with us.
And, well, thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for your comments. So I didn't get to very many of them. And yeah, those of you watching later as well, hope you enjoyed that, and see you next week.